It's an honour to be here today. It's my third year in a row that I've been to ACO with the conference, and I feel privileged to be here to address with my paper. In the literature addressing the issue of Jewish doctors and their actions while working in the concentration and extermination camps, there appears to be a simplistic one-size-fits-all approach whereby the basis upon which the decisions and actions made by the doctors have been thought of in the main as ethical dilemmas. The Jewish doctors did face ethical dilemmas, regardless of the camp or ghettos, making horrendous decisions and choices that fall beyond retrospective judgment. During the initial stages of working in the hospitals, the dark side of their newfound status as prisoner doctors rapidly became apparent when they were repeatedly required to abandon the tenets of the Hippocratic Oath. This dark side involved them in selections, human experiments, and the challenge of working with few or no medications or medical equipment. Under these circumstances, they were faced with ethical dilemmas on the basis that whatever decisions they made, one or more prisoners would die. However, in many cases, the doctors acted that led to the death of a prisoner or to the patient, enduring greater suffering when they did not face ethical dilemmas but were confronted with choiceless choices or acted according to the human condition. Thus, my thesis is ethical dilemmas were not the prime barometer that determined the choices and actions of the doctors during their interactions with patients and prisoners. My argument is that the doctors faced decisions and reacted in the context of the conditions and the culture of the camp. They were forced to work under extraordinary circumstances of extreme crisis and were responding to urgent predicaments, seldom with the time or freedom to stop and deliberate. Inarguably, the doctors were aware of their professional responsibilities and ethics, but the circumstances imposed on them brought into play other factors that shaped their decisions. In the absence of the essentials for good medical practice, the doctors were frequently denied choice. Too often and tragically, the only time the doctor had the opportunity to make a choice was when he or she was required to decide which prisoner, usually a fellow Jew, would live or would die. There are many examples, too many to discuss here, of the extraordinary good and courageous work of the prisoner doctors, such as in the case of those who worked in the epidemic blocks, risking their lives, or the defiance of doctors such as Elena Bruder, who disobeyed SS orders and refused to participate in human experiments, Berthold Epstein, who defied Mengele's orders to carry out specific experiments, insisting instead on conducting research into the disease of Noma, a cancer of the cheek common in Gypsy children. The issue is both complex and confronting, with ethics only one of a number of factors influencing decision-making. Other factors in play, as I said, include personal factors, the human condition, and the doctor's own drive to survive. My argument is that the factors influencing the choices and decisions made by prisoner physicians were not one-dimensional, based solely on ethical principles, but were multi-dimensional. Other factors that doctors had to consider when making decisions, in most cases life and death decisions, included: did the doctor have adequate medicines to treat all patients? Was the doctor's life under threat if he or she did not follow orders? Did doctors volunteer to work in hospitals and infirmaries to gain better conditions and potentially have a better chance of survival? Did some doctors take advantage of their status to the detriment of patients? If so, why? Should we take into consideration when and why decisions were made? Why didn't Jewish doctors refuse to participate in selections or human experiments? And there were exceptions. Were the doctors' decisions and general behaviour actions or reactions? For centuries, since Hippocrates, our expectations of our mindset regarding doctors have been that they are committed to do no harm, to be empathic, reliable, trustworthy, highly skilled, and to adhere strictly to the Hippocratic Oath. We expect them to be rational, judicious, and always in the best interests of the patient. However, the camps were not normal places, and nothing about them was rational. They were death camps in which the abnormal became normal, not only for the ordinary prisoners, but privileged prisoners such as the doctors. Under conditions of extreme adversity and crisis, where the threat of death was ever present, was it possible to think clearly and rationally? Or did irrational and abnormal choices and actions become rational and normal because of the policies and tactics of the SS? Prisoner physicians did not have the opportunity to think rationally and normally because they did not have the freedom to do so, and were by and large unwilling to put their lives in danger by insisting upon such a freedom. In other words, their main objective was to survive, which was a logical and natural instinct. Despite the courageous efforts and sacrifice of the Jewish doctors in treating and comforting patients, there was a marked divide between their commitments to the Hippocratic Oath and their innate drive to survive. Have we been so preoccupied with the role of the prisoner doctor as a clinician that we have failed to acknowledge that the doctors were also ordinary humans subject to the human condition that influences every one of us? Consideration must be afforded to every case to prisoner doctors, not only as doctors but also as humans. In addition to the circumstances under which their decisions and choices were made must be taken into consideration. Every case was different and the reasons for each decision was different. They cannot be put under the same label as medical ethics. I contend the basis of physicians' decisions were ethical dilemmas, choiceless choices, and the human condition. But at the same time, the main premise is that at all times the doctor's life was permanently under threat. The following cases represent examples of the above. I'll cut that out a bit. A definition of an ethical dilemma is the conflict between moral imperatives in which to obey one would result in transgressing another. In the case under discussion, examples would be during selections and treating patients with very limited or no supply of medication or medical supplies. Here we have Dr. Lewis Michaels, who was forced to participate in selections, and he hid patients, or he exchanged blood of patients with a fever. In his memoirs, he said, in this way, even if we could not do very much, they perhaps had a chance of survival, or at least could die a natural death. So he took it in selections, for example. He would hide prisoners, and that was his ethical dilemma. The next one is with Dr. Albert Hess, and he was Jewish. He went to the camp. He went to several camps as a political prisoner, but then they found he was actually Jewish. In one of the blocks, he found a particular prisoner he thought was contagious with a serious disease. He didn't know whether he would recover or not. He decided to go to another doctor. The doctor suggested he have a swab. He rushed back to the block, and by the time he got back to the block elder had murdered the prisoner. And from then on, any prisoner or patient that had a cough or had a fever, they murdered that particular prisoner. He thought he had an ethical dilemma, whether to keep of what to do with the prisoner, and obviously the block elder had a different opinion. The other, which is very interesting, is a choiceless choice, and in such a case the emphasis was on the self, was on the survival. When a crisis directly threatened the doctor's life, there was no dilemma, and very little thought, ethical or otherwise. And according to Hess, no one could be a saint in the daily and often primitive fight for survival. And this was a case of Eli Cohen. He was in charge of, he was a doctor of a block which he called the lunatic block. The particular prisoner one night was making a noise. The SS guard told him to quieten the particular prisoner. He had difficulty doing this. He was told by the SS guard that if he didn't quieten the prisoner, that Cohen would be executed. And some of the prisoners in the block, Cohen decided to kill the prisoner, to kill the patient. And as he says here, a few weeks later it happened again. By that time I had far fewer moral scruples about going upstairs and saying to Valentin, same old thing, we'll have to do it again, and we did, and that man died as well. To him, he had no choice. There was either him or the prisoner. So he decided to kill the prisoner, and that was his method of solving the problem. Another case of a choiceless choice was Albert Hess. He wasn't in Auschwitz, he was in Dachau. He was in a roll call. Every 10th prisoner in the roll call was being executed, shot in the back of the head. And Hess realised that he was the 10th prisoner, and next to him was a Muslim, and Hess, knowing that being the 10th prisoner he would be executed, he quickly replaced or moved the Muslim into his place, and as the guard came up, Hess says the doomed man didn't even have time to realise what was happening to him before the SS guard took his number and pulled him out of the line. He was facing me as he fell, and he cried out to me imploringly in a language I didn't know. His eyes fastened onto mine. The gun fired. He was dead. Mud splashed him as he fell sideways, his eyes still staring at me. The human condition, the instinct to survive. I put this in this because I found in writing a book that was as a result of my doctorate that the human condition is very important both in survival and in everyday life, obviously. And people act in different ways in different situations. And it comes out here with the doctors, the Jewish doctors, just to survive each day. Albert Hess is another example of this. When he was operating on a particular patient, he was actually amputating his leg. And he said, I had a split-second decision to make. Should I use this priceless Halpin on an apparently unconscious and dying man? He didn't know whether he'd die or not. Or save it to barter for life-sustaining favours. I decided to save it and prayed that the man on the table would die before I began to cut. As a doctor in Gruson II, I had to make such terrible choices almost daily. But he decided to take the Halpin and let the man die. But he did that not to save his own life, but to increase the quality of his life at some stage. There was no ethics in it. All he wanted to do was survive. The next case is Bruder, who, if you remember, she refused to do experiments in Block 10. But here we've got Emma Spaniard, who was a nurse. In her statement, she talks about Dr. Bruder, and she interrupted her or knocked on the door of her little room, and she said she was dining with 2 or 3 others. The table was elegantly set with white tablecloth and delicate china dishes. There was a tantalising fragrance of good food, animated conversation and rosy-coloured cheeks. And Bruder got upset with her on that basis, that she was caught having glanced at this concealed, corrupt opulence. That again, it was an example of the human condition, that all that Bruder wanted to do, in my opinion, was to basically have go back to the past, to, you know, whether it's right or wrong, we can't judge that, but that's what she wanted to do. She just wanted to experience that past, maybe. But at the same time, that food that she had, she could have given to the people in her block that was starving. Ethics had nothing to do with it. You know, it appears that she didn't really want to, you know, she wasn't thinking about ethics, in my opinion. I guess that's judging, but another human condition, which is very interesting, is Nilsley, who was worked for Mengele. He was his pathologist. He had just done pathology on a set of twins, young children, toddlers, whereupon one of the Mengele experimented on one twin, and the exact time this twin died they murdered the other twin. And he had done the pathology on this to Nilsley. His role was business as usual. He was a doctor, business as usual. He appeared to be, nothing's changed. I was a doctor before, I'm a doctor now. What he says is, I drank some tea spiked with rum. After a few glasses, I managed to relax. My mind cleared and freed itself of the pleasant thoughts that had been plaguing it. A pleasant warmth penetrated me, the voluptuous effects of the alcohol, comforting as the caress of a mother's hand. The cigarettes we were smoking had also been imported from Hungary. In the camp proper, a single cigarette was worth a ration of bread. Here on the table lay hundreds of packets. There is no sign or action that he shared, that he stole the cigarettes and gave them to people in the camp. In Bettelheim was very harsh in reviewing Nilsley in his memoirs. Another choiceless choice is Eli Cohen, and he was asked by a professor who was going to the gas chamber to give him a sedative because he wanted to be knocked out by the time he got to the gas chamber, but Cohen refused to give it to him. He had plenty of narcotics. He said, I could have gotten these narcotics. I didn't want to put my life in jeopardy unnecessarily. He was going to die anyway. But if he had given him the sedative, the professor would have had a better death, but he didn't do it. And what I'm saying is the human. It's interesting here because I'm saying a choiceless choice or a human condition. The choiceless choice to Cohen was that he was certain that he was going to die, because he was certain that he'd be caught. But on the human condition, he was full of anxiety and he was full of fear. So on one basis he had a choiceless choice, on the other basis it was a human condition. But there was no ethics in there. There was just no ethics. Later when he wrote his memoir, there was ethics. He sort of says, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. You know, I should have done it, but I didn't do it. So the human condition was ever present in all actions and behaviour, influencing the way doctors evaluated situations. The effects of the human condition are interwoven through every decision made and forms, in some cases, the very basis of the decisions or actions taken. Doctors' decisions must therefore be examined from a humanistic point of view rather than solely via ethical analysis. I've just got to get back to where I was. I'd like to just mention another example, and that's Dr. Adelsberger. She was in America, and she came back during the 30s to be with her mother, and her mother couldn't get into America, and she came back to Germany to be with her mother. And while not the practice, but it was common for the children with elder parents to euthanize their parents, particularly when they knew that they were going to go to places like Auschwitz and be murdered. And she had the equipment to do that. Her mother was an invalid, and she had that. She had the whatever morphine to do that, but she chose not to because she thought it was unethical, and she thought, how can I kill my mother? Then she went to Auschwitz, and in Auschwitz she had to perform abortions and she had to do selections, and she was very diligent in respect to the code of ethics. However, in the death march, she was on the death march, and there was a young girl that she was carrying, and she was carrying her on her shoulder. The girl was strapped to her shoulder, and it was freezing, and Adelsberger was tired, but the girl was far tireder. She was far weaker and tireder. And Adelsberger said to herself, I can't make it with this girl on my shoulder. But she knew that if she let the girl go, that the SS guard beside her would shoot her. And Adelsberger let her go. And the SS guard shot her. What I'm saying is that basically everybody in Auschwitz had the will to live. They wanted to live. And ethics, when I did my doctorate, over the 3-year period, the 4-year period, and I read all the doctors' memoirs, something like 35 of them, every one of them said they wanted to live. You know, they strove to live. They had a will to live. And ethics at the end came second. And this is basically why I don't think that we should just look at ethical dilemmas, that I think it's a combination of ethical dilemmas, choiceless choices, and the human condition. And throughout the human condition is interwoven through every decision that's made in respect to the decisions made by the doctors in the camp. So in conclusion, Jewish doctors were extraordinary and courageous people, but the culture of evil and inhumanity was so overwhelming that it wasn't solely a question of professional medical ethics, but more often than not a battle to survive. Whatever the decisions and choices made by Jewish and non-Jewish prisoner doctors, there can be no right or wrong. The small number of examples shown here demonstrate Jewish doctors were confronted with ethical dilemmas, but also found themselves in positions when they faced choiceless choices or acted not as doctors but as humans driven by the fierce will to live, when ethics played no role at all. Thank you.